Welcome back. So far, you have heard about the main challenges that urban systems face. In this session, I will now explain the basic features of a city's main infrastructure systems. We will first talk about transport, then we will address housing and green infrastructures. From there, we will move to energy infrastructures, to water and wastewater, to waste, to telecommunications infrastructures, and finally, I will show how all these infrastructures are related to each other. Now let's start with transport. So in a city, there are basic transport infrastructures: trains, tracks, roads, suburban trains, trains that cross the city, trams that are inside the city only. All these tracks are physically located in the city. The next element are the vehicles that use these tracks. So on the train tracks, we have trains, suburban trains, urban trains, metros, trains that cross the city. On the tram tracks, of course, we have trams, and on the road, we have several things like cars, like taxi, like public buses, like private buses, bikes, and sometimes also passengers. They use the roads. Now, a third element are the stations. That's where people move from one transport mode to the other. Train stations where people change from the bus to the train, from the bus to the bike, and of course also airports where people are changing from the train or from the road to the air transport. Usually those ones are located outside of the city. If we move to housing and green infrastructures, there are several types of housing infrastructures. There are typical houses, of course, but there are also factories, industrial constructions, and we see increasingly, especially in emerging countries, we see gated communities. Those are entire areas that are private, that are closed off, but they are located physically within a city. As for green infrastructures, this is something that is gaining attention more recently, mainly because of climate change and the use of the functions that these green infrastructures have for a city. Typically, we hear about parks. You know, what would New York City be without Central Park, for example? Many cities do have parks. Some have urban forests, rather at the periphery of the city. But there are also things like biological corridors where animals actually move through the cities, birds or bats. Then increasingly we see vegetalization. Houses are vegetalized, roofs are vegetalized, trees are planted, entire alleys of trees. So green infrastructures are equally important infrastructures as all the other ones, as they have a main function for a city. Energy infrastructures are basically electricity cable, gas tubes, which come into the city from outside of the city. The energy, the electricity, or the gas is produced far away and is then transported into the city. Now, there are two types of consumers of these energies. Typically there are household consumers and industrial consumers, factories that buy a big amount of electricity or gas. Now, there is a little generation in the city. Often it starts with backup generation in case the electricity system fails, especially the industrial consumers or the hospitals, for example. They are capable to bring in generators for backup, sometimes household, but rarely. Increasingly also, we see some sort of self-generation through renewable energy, through solar panels on the rooftops, but overall, the energy generated within the city remains very limited. Now, the drinking and the wastewater is a very interesting infrastructure in cities. Let's start with drinking water. So drinking water is generally abstracted out of the ground. We call this the river basin. And then the drinking water needs to be prepared before it can be distributed again to household consumers, individuals like you and me, or industrial consumers, which actually use up bigger amounts of water. Now, once the water has been used, it turns into wastewater. It is collected again. In most of the cities, it is collected, and then it is treated by wastewater treatment plants, and finally it is discharged, after which it goes back into the river basin, and the whole, what we call water cycle, starts again. Now, waste, and I should actually talk about consumption first, because before things turn into waste, they are consumed. And this way, they are consumed by households and again by industrial customers. This waste is then collected and treated. Generally, it is treated already to a certain extent inside the city or outside the city, but definitely the landfill where the waste is then deposited is generally located outside of the city. Now, increasingly, we see recycling and energy generation, such as district heating or sometimes even electricity, that is produced out of the treatment plants, or gas is even produced out of the landfills for electricity. So there is a little energy production that's coming out of waste. Communications infrastructures are equally interesting. Historically, telecommunications infrastructures are basically copper cables in the grounds in the city. Now, in some cities, you still see the telecommunication cables above ground, but this is becoming increasingly rare. Now, the new infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure that is replacing the copper cables is the fiber. And the fiber is put in along big alleys, and then it is connected either to households or to mobile towers, to Wi-Fi stations, to WiMAX stations, and offered as public or private Wi-Fi. Now, the households can be connected to different things. They can be connected to the physical telecommunications network, to the copper cables, or they can be connected to the Wi-Fi, to the fiber directly. But increasingly, people are then connected directly to mobile. They have a mobile phone, and in some countries, they only have a mobile phone, and then they are connected to mobile towers, which in turn are connected to the fiber. Now, all these infrastructures are, of course, related to each other. The first thing we see is that when in the ground, several infrastructures are put together. That it happens that cables are put together with fiber, with copper cables, with electricity cables. Tubes are put together, water tubes, wastewater tubes, gas tubes. Sometimes also electricity cables are put in there. And of course, in tunnels, we find a lot of things that go together. And in roads, of course, also the road is shared with the tram, with the buses, with the cars, with the bicycle lanes, with the people walking. So all these infrastructures have to be planned together so that for optimal use of the space that is available in the city. They not only have to be planned, but they have to be used together, because often it is cheaper to put them together. Now, let me say in conclusion that I have tried to offer you an understanding of the different types of infrastructures that are available in a city. What we will do now in the next session is look at the different dimensions that pertain to these infrastructures. They have economic dimensions, technical dimensions, social dimensions, and we will go into each of them in the next session.